Imagine that with really loud music. Yeah, I think it's okay. Yeah. Good morning again. Good morning again. If you have your Bibles, turn to Daniel. We're going to be all over Daniel. In fact, I'd encourage you just to read it on your own. There'll be a few things, that I'll throw out there to you, but you're on your own to read the rest of what's there. So I want to ask you a question. I want you to look at this photo, and I wonder how many of you know what that is. I know what it says it is. It says it's point zero. It's written in French, so it must be in France somewhere, right? It is. It's outside of the Notre Dame Cathedral. It is literally called Point Zero. What the French would say is this is where we started. Every point from this point is measured from here. This is the beginning. This is the point from which all distances are measured in France. They are saying, in effect, if you want to look to the starting point of anything in this nation, it is right here. There are very few of these in the world. The United States doesn't have one. A few countries in Europe do. But I thought of that when I was reading through the story. Not the story particular to today, but the story in general. That there is a point zero, right? The question is, what is your point zero? Here's another photo of the tabernacle in the wilderness for the children of Israel. God told the children of Israel, I want the tabernacle to be the center point of your very existence. I want the tabernacle to be point zero to you. So every house, every tent in the wilderness pointed towards the tabernacle. And that's not to say that it was to the tabernacle that they're pointing, but they're pointing to God. Because it is where God would manifest himself. At the very center of their community. And he said, I want you to understand what is point zero in your life. How does that compare to us today? I wouldn't say the church is point zero. I would say your relationship with Jesus Christ is point zero. That God says to you, I want to be central in your life. I don't want first place. I want to be in the center of everything that you do. I want everything else to orbit around me and my being and who I am and your relationship with me. He wants all of us. He wants to be the most important thing to you. In fact, C.S. Lewis said it well. He said, Christ says, give me all. I don't care so much or want so much of your money and so much of your work. I want you. I have not come to torment your natural self, but to kill it. No half measures are any good. I don't want to cut off a branch here and there. I want to have the whole tree. I don't want to drill the tooth or to crown it, but to have it out. That you would hand over all of your natural self so that his supernatural life could be lived in you. This was his goal for his people. This is why he called Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldees to walk with me. I am going to do a great thing through you. I'm going to create a family, and through that family, a nation. And in that nation and through that nation will come the Savior of the world. So that we can all walk with him. But I want primary place in your life. Second place will not do. Off center will not do. I must have center. But as we've observed, his people, his chosen people who saw him work in extraordinary ways, in miraculous ways, they somehow thought this just isn't enough. And the God who gave us the gifts has been sidestepped so that we worship the gifts that the God has given to us. They've replaced the centrality of God in this nation. Remember, Jeremiah said this last week to his people. My people have committed two sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and they have dug for themselves their own cisterns. Broken cisterns that cannot hold water. I am the living water. I have all you need. And you're digging in the desert, hoping that it'll rain, and maybe you can have a little drop to drink. Oh, perhaps it started small. I mean, maybe it was just a little wandering off here and there, but it eventually led in Israel to full-blown idol worship. And it wasn't long before the temple was closed, right? The kings literally would close the temple up, use it as a storage bin. Israel had failed to know who God was in his fullest. But you know what? This is amazing. Do you know why he eventually sent them off into captivity? It's because they forgot the Sabbath. It's because he said, I want you to rest. I want you to take a day and I want you to be with me, and I want you to let your fields rest every 7 years. I want you to stop farming. Give the land a break. Give yourself a break. Walk with me in fellowship. And instead they didn't do that. I mean, if you read 2 Chronicles 36 or Jeremiah, in fact, when they went to captivity, this is what 2 Chronicles 36 says. The land enjoyed its Sabbath. All the time of its desolation it rested until the 70 years were completed in fulfillment of the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah. Jeremiah said, because you have forgotten me, you are going to be, in a sense, forgotten by me. Jeremiah 25:11, this whole land shall become a ruin and a waste, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon for 70 years. For 490 years, the children of Israel stopped observing the Sabbath. And so for 70 years, God took his Sabbath back. Now, before you hear legalism in what I'm saying, let me tell you what Jesus said about the Sabbath. He said, the Sabbath was made for man, not the man. Sabbath was made for man, not the man for the Sabbath. It was given to you that you might walk with me and rest with me and know who I am. And when you start breaking that, when you stop breaking your time of rest and pulling apart and getting away, then you'll start forgetting me, which will lead to the worship of idols, which will eventually lead to them sacrificing their own children on these false gods, Molech, which will eventually lead to captivity in a foreign land. And this is what happened to Judah. You know, if you go back, you remember that Israel was a 12-tribe nation. And they split into two. There were 10 tribes in the north who went away first, and they completely disappeared. And then there was Judah. There was Judah and Benjamin, these two tribes that were left and were faithful for a while, off and on. But eventually they too walked away, and God is now beginning to send them all into Babylonian captivity. And Daniel 1 verse 1 says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem, and he besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylon and put in the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defects, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick in understanding, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and the literature of Babylon. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after they were to enter into the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So Daniel is one of these that is being taken captive from Judah. He's taken in the first exile. There were 3 of them. He's taken first along with some of the wonderful worship utensils from the temple. Now imagine this, okay? You're 15 years old, and here you are in Jerusalem. And something's going on here. Somehow this boy has been prepared for this. Even though at this time the temple was shut down, maybe their houses were pointing to it, but nobody, it seems, in Israel is paying any attention to the God of Israel. But there's something going on inside of his family that has prepared Daniel for what's about to take place. And one night, as Daniel maybe is sleeping, the guards break into his house and they quickly grab him. Nobody knew this was coming. And he sees his parents for the last time. What do his parents say to him as he's being dragged away? Remember what we taught you, Daniel. Don't forget the God of Israel. Stay faithful. Did we do enough, they're thinking, as their son is dragged away and brought to Nebuchadnezzar's city. An incredible city, an amazing metropolitan place, a place that almost anybody would love to go to. The historian Herodotus, in a book, described this city for us. He said, if you go to this city, it's in the form of a square, 14 miles in each direction, of enormous magnitude. And this is what he says. He said the brick wall was 56 miles long. And he said it was 300 feet in the air, 85 feet thick. I think this is an exaggeration. I can't imagine it was that big. But he said the top of the walls included a road wide enough for 4-horse chariots to turn around on. Inside of that massive wall, there was another wall behind it that was 75 feet tall. And it extended below ground 35 feet. There were 250 towers around this city. Some of them as high as 450 feet in the air. And there was a wide and a deep moat that went around the city. And I imagine Daniel and Ashpen and Ananiah and the boys were brought into this gate. It was called the Ishtar Gate, this massive gate that they would bring people through. And can you imagine the awe that must have been in their eyes as they crossed under this massive gate and they're brought into the city? Inside of this city, there was this massive pyramid, only 1 foot shorter than the great pyramids at Giza, 600 feet wide on each side and 480 feet tall. The Euphrates River ran through Babylon, and there was actually a 1/2 mile drawbridge in this city. Streets were paved with stone slabs, 3 foot square. This incredible city. There was things there called the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. These were one of the 7th wonders of the ancient world. According to what I read this week, Nebuchadnezzar's wife was a country girl, and she wanted to bring some of the country to the city. So Nebuchadnezzar brought some of the country to the city. And there were these hanging gardens that were watered by hydraulic pumps. Incredible in that time. And Nebuchadnezzar's palace, they would have been amazed at Nebuchadnezzar's palace. Such a magnificent thing that in that day they considered it to be the most magnificent building ever erected on the earth. And it isn't just that this place was big and beautiful with its architecture, but it was a brilliant place. It was a place of mathematics and science and the arts. It was above and beyond anything you could imagine. If you have a watch on your wrist, you can thank Babylon for that. 60 seconds in a minute. 60 minutes in an hour. 360 degrees in a circle. This was discovered in Babylon. Their engineering was top drawer. They even began to think about air cooling buildings. This is BC, guys. Their music was famous. They had libraries all over the place. We're talking about an advanced pagan culture that would have been absolutely shocking to Daniel and his young friends. But above all, they were polytheistic in their theology. No other nation on earth historically has been so permeated by the belief in the gods. In Daniel's time, there were 1,197 temples to the gods in Babylon. All of their music was done for the gods. All of their mathematics were done for the gods. In their temples, on top of their temples, they had these observation decks where they viewed the stars for astrology purposes, not astronomy, but for astrology. So you go into this city after leaving the ruins of Jerusalem, and you look around and you think to yourself, how can I possibly stand for the Creator God when I'm faced with thousands of other choices? Daniel is ripped from his parents' arms and brought to this place. And there was a very intentional purpose to make them stop believing in the God of Israel and to believe in their God. So let me ask you this. How would your children fare if they were to be ripped from your arms and brought into a godless culture who sought to change their name, who sought to change their belief, who sought to change their lifestyle? What have you done to prepare them for this? Because guess what, folks? We live in Babylon. And every day they walk out of your doors, that's where they're going. And everything that they're hearing, almost everything, is geared to taking them away, not bringing them to. So if I might just say one more time, hear, O Bennington Bible Church. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments shall be on your own heart. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, because you don't know when home's going to be no more for them. When you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up, tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. Make sure that they know. Daniel's parents, they must have done something right, because we'll find out, firstly, that Daniel's faith was founded. It's amazing. What a guy, 15 years old, ripped out and brought to this place. Nebuchadnezzar's goal was to take this young, bright Jewish boy and turn him into a Babylonian. So at the end of verse 4, you see that it says that they were to teach them the language and the literature of the Babylonians. Daniel was to be indoctrinated with a whole philosophy and worldview of the Babylonians. A 3-year training period included medicine and law and math and astronomy and religion. It was a very intensive 3-year course, and it was very purposeful. When Daniel first gets there, the first thing that they try to do is change his name. Daniel's name means God is my judge. We're changing your name to Belteshazzar. Bel is the god. Where you saw that temple pyramid, that was to Bel. Changed his name to Bel is my prince, Belteshazzar, not Daniel. But you know what you find as you walk through all of the book of Daniel? It's so amazing. They always call him Daniel. Only very few times do they call him Belteshazzar. He held on to his name. This is who I am. I am not who you say I am, and I will not be convinced otherwise. When they tried to change his name, he had already made up his mind. This is who I am. I love this verse. But Daniel, resolved in his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's food or the king's wine. And what's amazing is, he could have been so easily angered at his future. I'm so mad at you, God. How could you take me away from my family? I'm hurt by this, and I refuse to follow you this direction. And I'm in Babylon now, so when in Babylon, do as the Babylonians, right? You know what's interesting about most atheists who come to atheism a little bit later in life? Not all, but many, I would say most. They don't come because of an intellectual decision. They come because something has happened. Some tragedy has happened that knocked them off of their faith. A mother dies of cancer that they'd prayed that wouldn't happen. Some financial reversal that takes place. A couple who was trying to get pregnant for years, they finally get pregnant and that baby is stillborn. A woman who's been abused. A man who's lost his job. So through circumstances, they just stop believing. They lose their song. Daniel could have very easily lost his song. In Psalm 137, I think I've read this before, but it says, by the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept when we remembered Jerusalem. There on the poplars, we hung our harps. Our music was gone. We couldn't sing because it hurt too bad. And yet, when we're hurting the worst, that's when we need to sing the loudest. For goodness sakes, we must sing now. And he says, if I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy. If I used to play the harp and I stop, may I lose that skill. If I used to sing for the glory of God, may I lose my voice. If I let my circumstances deal with or detract me from walking with God in a difficult situation. He resolved in his heart, whatever happens from this point on, I will not defile myself. I will worship God fully. I love that word resolved in the Hebrew. It really means to collect. Like a person who would begin to make a rope. They would collect strand after strand after strand after strand, and they would put those strands together. And one might break easily, but many would not. And he resolved over time because of what he was taught at home. And what he was taught at home strengthened his faith, and nothing could break it. I resolved because of what I had become, because of wonderful parents who instilled this in me, and maybe something that happened outside of that. John Lennox said this, it's wonderful. He said, the question for Daniel was not, what city are you in? But rather, what city do you live for? He may have been in Babylon, but he lived for another city. And so Daniel was founded in his faith, which made Daniel fearless in his faith. It started off simply with food. We want you to eat the king's food. But what Daniel knew about that food is it had been sacrificed to idols, that the instruments that they drank them in were probably the instruments that were taken from the temple that had been desecrated. I can't drink out of those utensils. I can't eat this food that's been sacrificed. I can't do it. And so he went to Ashpenaz and he said, can you give us vegetables and water? And Ashpenaz is like, no, you will look terrible after that. See, he's right. That was a joke. You will look awful. He knew what vegetables alone would do. And he said, no, you can't just drink that and eat that. You've got to eat the king's food. If not, they will be able to tell exactly what's been going on. And Daniel says, then test us. Test us. Give us this diet for 10 days. And if we don't look better, then we'll eat the food. This was miraculous what God did, because they ate this food and for 10 days and they looked better than all of the others. So they allowed him to eat. He said, I will stand for what I believe. And then there was a series of dreams that the king had that Daniel became a part of. Daniel showed himself to be an absolutely amazing young man, as did Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. But really, for our purposes today, we're just going to talk about Daniel. And Daniel was really one of the top dogs there. He was one of his advisors, and Nebuchadnezzar had this dream, but he wouldn't tell anybody what the dream was. So he called all his astrologers and magicians and all those guys and said, I had a dream. I want you to interpret it for me. And they all said, okay, great. Tell us the dream, and then we'll interpret it. And Nebuchadnezzar's like, no. If you're so smart, you tell me my dream, and then interpret it. Because he knew that they were probably a bunch of snake oil salesmen. They would hear his dream and make something up. Well, King, we can't do that. You got to tell us what the dream is before we can come up with an interpretation. No. And if you don't, I'll cut you to pieces. Well, we can't. Well, that's what's going to happen to you. So he gives this order. Kill all the wise men in Babylon. And Daniel finds out, and he goes to the king and says, King, would you just give me some time? Let me see if I can't figure this dream out. And he goes to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And he says, pray, pray that God would give me this. And over time, God did give him this. And Daniel writes this big hymn of praise. And he goes back in to Nebuchadnezzar and he says, I know what your dream is. He said, oh, you do you? What is my dream? You had this dream. This dream was like you saw this massive figure, right? It was a man, but he was made up of all different metals, right? Yeah, that's right. And the head, it was gold, wasn't it? Yeah, it was gold. And the breast and the arms, they were made of silver, right? Yes, that's right. They were made of silver. And the belly and the thighs, they were bronze, right? How do you know this? What about the legs? Oh, the legs, they were made of steel. Yeah. What about the toes? What about the feet? They were made of mixed elements, clay and metal. How did you know? I don't know. No, I do know. God gave it to me. This isn't some talent that I have. God gave me this ability. Well, what does it mean? Well, here's what it means. Are you ready for this? Because at the end of the dream, what he saw was that this rock that wasn't cut out by any hands, it came and it just fell at the feet of this big statue, and it totally destroyed, just busted it up, and so all the pieces floated off into nothingness. And so Daniel says, here's what it is. The statue was kingdoms, and each part is a different kingdom. And Nebuchadnezzar, I got great news. The top one, the one that's made out of gold, that's you. Because there's no kingdom like yours. But your kingdom's not going to last forever. There will be coming somebody behind you who will be of less substance than you. And then somebody will come after that, and somebody will come after that, and somebody will come after that. But eventually, King, this is where it's so awesome. All of these kingdoms will be destroyed by something heavenly. And that rock, that stone, will be set up as an eternal kingdom. It's a beautiful picture of Jesus Christ establishing his kingdom. It's amazing. We'll go on because we don't have much time. And so Nebuchadnezzar's like, that's right, that's amazing. And so he praises the God of Daniel. But then there's a second dream sometime later, where Nebuchadnezzar is disturbed again. And this is a dream. He dreams that he sees this tree that's growing. And it's this massive tree growing all the way up to the heavens. And its branches go out and birds come into it. And the fruit is wonderful. People eat the fruit. And beasts of the field, they sit underneath its shade. But then it's cut off and it's bound. The stump is. What does that mean, Daniel? Well, King Nebuchadnezzar, what this means is that you are this tree. And if you look at the kingdom of Babylon, isn't it amazing, King? How you support so many people and everybody knows about you. It's like this massive thing and people are blessed by this kingdom, but it's going to be cut down. It's going to be cut down because of your pride. But here's the good news, is that stump, well, it's going to stay alive. And over time, that tree's going to regrow again. It's talking about you. And so about a year later, King Nebuchadnezzar forgets about this. And he's out looking at Babylon the Great. And he's all cocky, banging on his chest. And he says, look at this city. Oh, is this not Babylon the Great, which I, Nebuchadnezzar, have, founded and I'm running? And as the words pass through his lips, just as they leave, he goes crazy. He literally goes insane. He leaves the kingdom. He runs outside of the city walls. And for 7 years, this man is stark raving mad. His hair grows long. His fingernails grow long. He's crazy. He's wet with the dew of the ground. He's like an animal out there. And after 7 years, just like it came, it left. He came back to his senses. And he was able to take over control again of Babylon. Well, eventually, Nebuchadnezzar gave way to Belshazzar, who is his son. And this king didn't learn any lesson, sort of like the Israelites. And one day, Belshazzar was throwing a party for all of his boys. And they were drinking wine out of these utensils from the temple of Israel, the temple in Jerusalem. And as they're just partying, having a great time, all of a sudden, from out of nowhere, this hand appears. Without wrist or arm or body. And it writes on the wall, Meeny, tekel, upharsin. Oh, right? You have any idea what that means? He didn't either. He's like, what is this? And it's so cool. If you read the actual text, it says that he was terrified, that his knees started to knock together. He was that scared. And he's like, what is this all about? And by this time, Daniel had kind of been forgotten in the kingdom. And Nebuchadnezzar's wife, I think, comes to Belshazzar and says, hey, there's a guy in the kingdom. He could probably tell you what this means. Well, whoever can, I'm going to give him a full thing of clothes and I'm going to set him up. It's going to be great. And so they bring in Daniel, who by this time is a little bit older. He's not the teenager that we knew in the beginning. And he comes to Belshazzar and he says, listen, your daddy, God did some amazing things in his life. And eventually he recognized the God that I love and I serve. And you've not learned anything. You're so cocky. Let me tell you what these words mean. Meeny, tekel, upharsin. You have been weighed in the balances, and you have been found wanting. So your kingdom will be taken from you this very night by the Persians, by the Medo-Persian Empire, the second in that vision. And Belshazzar's like, oh, thank you. Did you just hear what I said? You're going to die tonight. Oh, whatever. At least I know. I don't think he believed him. And that night, the Medo-Persians, they had gone through the river Euphrates and they'd come into the city. And that night, Belshazzar was killed. Daniel, his faith was founded and his faith was fearless. He could stand in front of these kings and tell them exactly what God said because his faith was founded. And the next thing is that Daniel's faith was firm. And what I mean by that is that Daniel's faith, it stood the test of time. You know that he was in Babylon for 70 years. He probably died in Babylon. Probably at 15 he came in. At this point where we're going right now, he's probably 80, 82 years old. He's an old man who's lived faithfully for God. He has always served him. He has never done anything that would blemish his testimony or the Lord's. He finished well. That's a pretty amazing thought. Eric Liddell, that great Olympic runner who ran the 400 meter, which wasn't even his race, and he won an Olympic gold medal in 1924. Somebody came up to him and said, Mr. Liddell, I just have to know, how is it that you run the 400 meter as well as you do, even though it's not your race? He said, well, this is my secret. I run the first 200 meters as fast as I can. And then in the second 200 meters, by God's help, I run faster. That's how I do it. I don't let up. I run to finish this race by God's help. This is Daniel. The first part, I ran as fast as I could to the glory of God. And the second part, I'm running to the glory of God as fast as I can. And Daniel could say with Eric Liddell or the Apostle Paul, I fought the good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. Daniel remained credible. Even though he was in the highest of positions, power didn't go to his head. Political correctness didn't destroy him. He stayed faithful. So when the third king comes in, his name is Darius. His reputation has gone before him. And in Daniel chapter 6, it says, it pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. So Daniel is like the top 3. And listen to this story. It's so amazing. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charge against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, verse 5, these men said, we will never find any basis of charge against this man unless it has something to do with the law of his God. The only way we can get him is to go after his faith. That's it. They could find nothing in Daniel's character after 60 plus years of serving in a corrupted government. Can you imagine if somebody was looking into your personal life and they had access to everything? Could they say the same thing about you? I read this probably a couple of years ago. Bob, it says, is from a closely knit family. The lengthening and magnificent shadow of his father's life of greatness and uncompromising integrity spread across each of the children from their birth until his death, which came late in his life. Bob has nothing but pleasant memories of being with his father, listening to his stories, watching him endure numerous and stressful tests, laughing and lingering around the supper table. He was clearly the leader of their home, decisive, fair, kind, humble, joyful, and pure. And suddenly Bob's wonderful father died. Even though all of the children were grown and had children of their own, most of them married, the jolt of his being gone was almost more than the family could manage. Their grief knew no bounds. It ran deep as tears flowed and hearts broke. Following the funeral, it became necessary for all of them to force themselves to go on with their lives, which included the difficult task of removing the man's clothes from the closet, wrapping up his final affairs, his financial affairs, and finally going through the remainder of his personal effects. All those tasks were shared by the adult members of his family. Bob was chosen to go through his personal affairs. That was his responsibility, and he didn't want to do it. He would be the one to sit down and look through the things that other eyes had never seen. Some of them not even the man's wife. Though reluctant to do this because of the twinge of fear that gripped him, wondering what he might find, he hesitated before saying yes. Would he uncover some secret sins? Would he locate evidence of private compromise? Would the man's computer reveal some questionable sites he visited frequently? Would there be invoices he never paid, traffic tickets he had ignored and buried from view, some pictures or love note from an otherwise unknown woman with whom the man had spent time? Bob dreaded the thought of anything tarnishing the image of the man who had not only been a marvelous father, but the man who had become his hero, his mentor, his model for life. Though fearful and reluctant, Bob accepted the task. With diligence and cautious concern, he dug in behind closed doors, hour after hour, through dozens of photographs, examined financial records, thumbed through recent and hand-dated notes, unlocked little private areas of his internet activities, checked out copies of letters written and received, and finally came to the man's most personal little boxes that every man owns. Sealed envelopes, examining every file, every folder, meticulously and tediously, Bob searched through everything. And to his great relief and delight, he found nothing that was even near suspicious or questionable. Nothing. The man was as clean and clear in his private life as he had been before his family and in the eyes of the public. A modern day Daniel who was faithful. No negligence or corruption was found in him. And Bob began to weep audibly, overjoyed that the man he'd admired all of his life was everything he believed him to be. Then he started to dance all around the room going, yes, 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 yes. See the reward of a life well lived. It never ends. Isn't that beautiful? What happens to your files? What do they find in your life? In Daniel's life, nothing. He was above reproach. The only thing they could do is attack his faith. And so they went to Darius and they said, "Oh, king, live forever. We think you're just the best king that's ever been. And we want everybody else to know it too. So here's what we want you to do. We want you to declare that no other God could be prayed to except you for 30 days because you're the best." And because of his pride, he thought, well, you know, I kind of do want people to think I'm special. What a great idea. Signed it. Now, the law of the Medes and the Persians is once it's signed into law, it can never be changed. So Daniel, when he finds out about this, what happens? Well, this is so beautiful. It says when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, what did he do? He went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open towards Jerusalem, and he got down on his knees 3 times a day and he prayed and he gave thanks before his God. as he had done previously. Nothing changed. He knew what the order was, that this act would surely bring him to death, but he doesn't change. He just does what he's always done. And he goes up to his upper room. And by the way, these windows were high. Nobody could just see into them, okay? They had to climb up to see if he was praying. He just did what he had always done. And so they go to the king. King, you set this decree up. You said it. Nobody can pray to anybody but you. Well, guess what? You know that Jew, Daniel? Well, he's been praying to his God, facing Jerusalem. Oh, no. Daniel. Oh, come on, guys. Are you serious? You're going after Daniel? And you use my pride to do it? And they're like, well, you signed it. Sorry, king. And he tried everything to get out of this. There's no way that his top official could be killed, this man of integrity, for praying, but the king signed it. Couldn't do away with it. So they took Daniel, and you know the story. Gosh, do I have to go over it with you? They took him to the lion's den. And Darius said, Daniel, the God that you pray to, he's going to sustain you. I hope. And they threw him in. And they closed the door. And it's so cool how this is kind of coming full circle. When Daniel first got to Babylon, he refused to eat the king's food. Well, now the lions refuse to eat the king's food too. And there's Daniel, down in the lion's den, protected by angels. Can you imagine what that must have been like? Was he petting, the lions? Was he playing with them? Or was he over in a corner like, I'm scared to die? I don't know. But it had to be pretty amazing. There he is in the pit with the lions, and Darius is in his bed. He's not eating. He's not being entertained. He's just hoping that Daniel is alive. And at the end, at the break of day, he leaves his palace. He runs to Daniel. And when he's far away, he cries out, Daniel, Daniel, did your God protect you? And Daniel's like, hey, king, live forever. I'm good. God protected me. You should have been here. It was incredible. Get him out of there. And all those officials who wanted him dead, they threw them in. And according to Scripture, before they even hit the ground, they were devoured. Well, those lions were hungry. They just didn't like the way Daniel tasted, I guess. And he survived. It's really quite amazing. Daniel was a man of faith. He's a great example. But there's one last thing I want to share with you, okay? And this may be confusing to you, but I have to share it because it may be one of the coolest things about this whole passage. Daniel's faith was founded, wonderful parents who instilled in him a godly heritage, thus making him fearless. He stood firm for the rest of his life. But if you read the book of Daniel, that's really just half the book. That's the first 6 chapters. The last 6 are all prophetic. And so much of them have to do with Jesus Christ. Remember the first part, the rock crushing the kingdoms, setting up its own kingdom. This is Jesus. One of these days, he's going to do that to the restored Roman government. It's going to happen. But this, I just have to read it to you, okay? And then I'm going to try to explain it as simply as I can. This is so cool. This is absolutely amazing. So don't read too hard into it. Just listen and I'll try to explain it. Okay, here we go. Daniel chapter 9. 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city, the Jews, to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Let me just read the whole thing. Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the whole of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and moat, but in a troubled time, okay? So I want you to see in there 69, okay? 7 plus 62 is 69, okay? Goes on. Is that right? 7 plus 6? Yeah, that's right, okay. And after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and at the end there shall be war, desolation, and desolation are decreed. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week. There's one more week. So how many you got? Yeah, 69 plus 1 equals 70. Right? 70 weeks is there. And for half of the week he shall put an end to the sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abomination shall come one who makes desolate, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. Okay, now I know that that's really crazily confusing, but I want to tell you what it means, and I just don't have time to go into all the depths and the details, okay? This is what's so amazing. So Daniel was written 400 plus years before any of this was going to happen. And what he's saying here is there's going to be a decree by the guy that follows you, Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes is going to decree that you can go back and rebuild Jerusalem. When that decree is made, look at the calendar and know this, that in 483 years from that moment, the Messiah will come. There's an actual set date. That why didn't they know this? I'm not sure. But for 483 years, from the time that they go back to Jerusalem to the time that Jesus enters Jerusalem will be 483 years. And this is what's so amazing. You can literally go back. In fact, a historian has actually done this. And he thinks he can date it. He believes that on April 6th, on March 14th, 445 BC, King Artaxerxes gave the order to rebuild Jerusalem. And if you fast forward 483 years to the day, he believes on April 3rd, 32 AD, Jesus Christ entered into Jerusalem. And you can go back and you can look, and it's too complicated for me to go through all the details, but this is amazing to me that Daniel is saying, do the math and you can figure it out. So we got 69 weeks, right? 69 weeks, right? 49 weeks. No, 69 weeks. I'm sorry, 69 weeks. We're missing a week. What happens to this other week? I know you're totally confused, but I have to say this for my own good. So when Jesus comes to Jerusalem, God just sort of stops the stopwatch. And we are still stopped to this day. We are in something called the church age because the Jews rejected Jesus. So we get the gospel to us. Well, when the rapture takes place, which is the next thing on God's eschatological calendar, he starts the stopwatch again. And there's 7 more years. The 7-year tribulation period. We don't know when that is, but we know that the 69 weeks have been fulfilled. The only thing that we're looking forward to is the rapture. And then that 7-year tribulation. I just think that's fascinating. Maybe you think that's stupid. I think it's amazing. We can look back and we can see that Jesus came, and historians can bear this principle out. And Daniel is the one that was able to share that. Because Daniel was the man of God that he was. And God used him in such a way. You know, our prayer and our purpose and our passion at Bennington Bible Church is that you would possess an authentic relationship with Jesus Christ from the earliest of your childhood till you step into eternity. And in Daniel's life, we see this exhibited. So I hope that you will take that to heart and be like Daniel. Dare to be a Daniel. There's a great old hymn. I'm not going to sing it for you, but you ought to read it. Lord, thank you for Daniel. Thank you for his example. Thank you for what he did in his exile. I pray that we would also think that through. Help us to know what our calling is inside of our own Babylon. I pray that we'd be faithful. I pray for our parents. I pray that they would be men and women of God that prepare their kids for the most important thing. Help us not to be distracted. Help us to find our rest in you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.